So, welcome everyone to the Profitable Steward Podcast. This is also being recorded as a live webinar. We appreciate you being part of this group, and we're really grateful here to have Jared Luhman here with us today. He's a fellow podcaster. His current podcast is called The Ranching Returns, and the prior one was what was it branded as before?
The Herd Quitter podcast.
Herd Quitter. Yep, Herd Quitter. That's right. So we appreciate his contribution to the agriculture industry, specifically regenerative agriculture. He's had some wonderful guests on there and has done a great service for this community and for this industry. So if you're joining us here live, we welcome you. Know that you can ask questions in the chat. I'll facilitate those, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A afterwards. If you're listening to the recording and you want to catch the presentation, which Jared already has pulled up, jump over to our YouTube channel, which is the Profitable Ag Steward. And you can watch this and all the recordings from the wonderful guests that we've had in the past. I think we just passed our 100th podcast episode, which for us is kind of a big deal, but we're just actually just getting started when we look at what Jared's done, what Clay Conroy and some of the other greats in the industry. Um, you know, they're they're uh, they're ahead of us in the sense that they have maybe more downloads and more uh, followers. But the cool thing about these podcasts is we're just so blessed to have wonderful, wonderful guests who share from their heart, who share experiences and give us actionable steps to be able to take away and apply. And so I know that you're going to get that as you listen here today. So Jared, let's jump in. Tell these folks where you're from.
Yeah,
Um,
you bet.
First,
And first of all, congrats on 100 episodes. That is a big deal. That's fantastic. I was super excited. Really, I think it's something like if you're over 10, you're above the average, something like that. If you
oh,
stick with it
really?
so long, so you're crushing it. And I really enjoy your podcast. Those recordings you had with Bud and Eunice Williams, those so cool. What a gold mine those conversations were. I shared it with the first one with like a dozen people. I thought it was awesome. So,
Yeah.
but no, thanks so much for having me. I sure appreciate the opportunity to come chat with you guys, share a little bit about my story. See if I can advance my slides. There we go. Good. Okay. Yeah. So I farm in southeast Minnesota with my wife Valerie and my dad John. A bit of a history and an overview of our farm. And Jared, if there's, for all of you, if there's questions at any point, feel free to throw them in the chat. I'm more than happy to answer questions and anything that I may not have said very clearly. And if I'm jumping out of line here to dive into this, Jared, let me know too. But I'm just going to go ahead and get started if that works for you.
Yeah. Yep. That is perfect.
Perfect. So a bit of a history. It's kind of I think anyway, a pretty cool history. Way back in like the 1970s, 80s, my dad or my grandpa and his brother were farming together in what would be considered pretty progressive farmers here in southeast Minnesota. They were farming over 1,000 acres of row crops. They had a couple hundred dairy cows, which at the time was a lot. A couple hundred big, framey Simmental beef cows, pushing the gain and the production and stuff on them, and a couple hundred sheep. And with all that they had going on, they actually had a lot of foreign exchange student labor come and help, specifically in the summer months when Dad talks about it as pretty much haying whenever the sun shined here. And anyway, we had one exchange student from New Zealand who came over and was working on our farm. And apparently New Zealand culture is to not hold back on their opinions. He told my dad and grandpa, "Oh, you're doing everything wrong. You're 15 years behind us over in New Zealand. You work way too hard. It just makes no sense." And if you get nothing out of this whole conversation, one of the coolest things that I think I've learned from my dad and my grandpa there, and I credit to them, is the fact that in this area, they were progressive farmers, and they very easily could have just said, "You don't know what you're talking about. You're a kid from another country. What would you know?" But they didn't. They said, "Interesting." And my grandpa encouraged my dad, said, "You should go to New Zealand and figure out what he's talking about and how do you apply it, or how can we apply it here in Minnesota." And I'm so glad that they did. I think that was incredible. And so my dad went over and spent 8 or 9 months working on a couple different grazing, dairy, sheep, beef stations over in New Zealand, and really fell in love with that low input grass based production model, and brought it back here to Minnesota. So a brief kind of overview of from there till now. My grandpa continued to kind of farm conventional beef and crops. He split off farming with his brother, so he got rid of the dairy at that point, but continued to do that along with an off-farm job. And so my dad actually bought a farm and made a living on a 200-acre grazing dairy farm about 3 miles down the road from our home place until early 2000, 2001, somewhere in there, when my grandpa was ready to retire. And so my dad sold that dairy, bought a little more land, and really kind of dove into taking over the home farm, which at the time was around 500 acres at that point. And a little bit of context in our region where conventional corn and soybean production is pretty common. It's always been general rule of thumb that I've heard people say is you need minimum 1,000 acres per family to farm full time. And here we were trying to, keep my grandpa and my dad and eventually me making a living on what was a 500-acre farm. And a lot of people kind of went the route of to figure out how to make that happen of debt and risk and expansion. And my dad more went the other route of low input production and high value production. So organic row crops and seed stock beef genetics is what he did. In the midst there for a little while, he did some grass finishing beef. He tried some sheep, but ultimately kind of settled on that organic row crop and seed stock production. So jumping to today, that's still what we're doing. We've expanded the beef cows. We were around 120, 130 cows in 2015 when I came home from college. We've continued to expand that herd and reduce the organic crop acres to where we sit today, about 750 acres total, with 120 of that being land that we can't graze, and the rest pretty much all going into grass and cattle at this point. So that's a brief overview. My dad, I really credit a lot to him and learning. He always encouraged learning. From the day I came home, he let me get off the farm. I was working at home, let me get off the farm to go to field days, pasture works, conferences, conventions. And over the course of that and listening to podcasts and reading books, really started to kind of, shape in my mind anyway, the idea of profitability and understanding what profitability really is. We started to get this before we went to the Ranching for Profit School in 2021, but for those of you who have been there, this might look familiar, and that's the idea of what's profitability, kind of from the RFP model. And I really liked it. It makes a lot of sense to me. And so profit, by this definition, is what's left over after paying fair market land rent on owned or leased land. And that includes land that is bought and paid for, generational ranch land or farmland that you maybe don't owe a dime on. So you don't have that mortgage payment or rent payment that is physically written. But the operating business separated from the land operation should charge that in its, economic analysis. And that would also go for if you have a mortgage on some land that's way higher than rent, that shouldn't necessarily hinder the operating business. To really get a fair look at the operating business, it should charge fair market rent no matter what you owe, whether it's $0 or far more than rent on land. That one made a lot of sense to me. The other one then is full charge of labor, and same thing. That can be a lot of people probably, maybe have a spouse that works off the ranch, or they have an off-farm job, or maybe they take a $30,000, $40,000 a year paycheck, but they're working two full-time equivalents, and that's not fair labor. And so demanding your operating business to charge what it would cost to replace all the labor at fair market rent or fair market value is how we use that. And the one that I would say was a big paradigm shifter for me and continues to be one that we challenge ourselves on is this idea of charging a return on equity or return on an interest charge on capital in a business. And I guess the way I've kind of looked at that is, looking at a lot of times we talk about separating the operating business from the land business and separating even further the equity business is, look at yourself as a banker lending your money to the operating business. No bank out there would lend money to your operation and not demand some sort of a return. So why should you do that with your own capital? So that goes for equipment, whether it's paid for or maybe you've got it half paid for. There's some equity still in that tractor, or cows. or whatever the ATVs, trucks, trailers, the tool is. If you've got equity in a business, that equity should demand some sort of a return. The number we use is 10%. If you look at the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund over the last 50 plus years, or since its inception, I think it has earned a little over 10% on average over that time. And so that's the number we use. Maybe you're content using just the risk-free rate of return in a treasury bill or something like that. But use whatever number. We use 10%. And then obviously all other production costs that you have in your business inputs. Those are the easy ones, though. Those first three are the ones that you may not have to write a check for. And that's why it's important to include it. And that was really paradigm shifting for me. When we started to, just to kind of further hash that out, actually, I worked for a few years as a consultant for the Sustainable Farming Association here in Minnesota, and worked with one. I gave a presentation somewhere, and somebody came up to me after the presentation and said, was telling me, I've got a really profitable operation. Let me tell you about it. And he said, I own 50 free and clear acres of pasture. I've got 30 paid for cows. I've got an older line of, haying equipment, nothing special, but it's paid for. And then he, in this area, there's a lot of corn and soybean producers. They have waterways and ditches. They like to see them cleaned up. And so he got free grass in exchange for essentially cleaning up those ditches. He got to make hay on it for free. And since he had an off-farm job, he didn't pay any labor. And so he asked me, am I profitable? And I can't maybe answer, but I'd ask you guys, is that operation profitable based on the information that he had given me at that point? And the answer really is you can't tell from that information. You don't know. But we sat down over lunch and hashed through a lot of his numbers, and we found out a couple things. One, his haying enterprise was very profitable, which for those who are ranching for profit people, a lot of people talk about stop making hay and everything. In his situation, he had no land cost on that hay, no fertilizer, no seed. All he had was equipment. So his hay enterprise was very profitable. His cow enterprise was not. When that cow enterprise was forced to pay fair market value for the hay, and fair market labor and all this stuff, we found that it was not profitable at all. And so again, one of these paradigm shifting things for me is the idea that cash flow and profitability may or may not be the same thing. You can be cash flow positive and not be profitable. You can also be profitable and not cash flow positive. If you retain a bunch of heifers or something like that, you may have created a large amount of value and show an economic profit, but a negative cash flow. And I think a lot of farmers are oftentimes very good at hiding cash flow and by doing that or purchasing something else, and that's okay. But understanding the difference, I think, is really an important first step to diving into your own businesses and really figuring out where is profit being made and what's cash flowing. For this individual, we ended up kind of creating a plan for him, which involved selling the cows, custom grazing for the summer months, which reduced his labor from a 12-month labor system to a 5-month labor system, and freed up that capital in those 30 cows for other investments. And he continued to make hay, but he sold it at market value at an extreme profit. And his cash flow went through the roof at the same time as his profitability. So that was a really cool conversation. I include this just because it's interesting. That's a lot of numbers. You can ignore most of it, but this is from the University of Minnesota FinBin data. It's the average cow-calf profitability in Minnesota for the last 10 years. And the line right above the red line there is the one that's net return after labor and management. And a 10-year average, including the last 2 years, which were incredible years, was a net loss of $44.42 per cow per year. And again, that kind of goes back to that cash flow versus profitability, is how are these people continuing, or how and why are these people continuing to operate when they're showing a net loss year after year, 8 out of the last 10 years. And it goes back to, if you look at a lot of those are charges they're probably not writing checks for. They're just subsidized with unpaid labor, paid for land, paid for equipment, and stuff like that. So just an interesting kind of a spreadsheet that I found interesting anyway. I guess how we applied this on our farm, the first thing we dove into was our overhead and our opportunity cost. At the time, we were running we had 7 tractors for a few hundred acres of row crops and some cows. And I don't know, I guess now with modern technology and GPS equipment, maybe one person can run more than one tractor, but we don't have anything that fancy. And at this point, only one, my dad and I can still only drive one tractor each. And so having 7 tractors really was an inefficient use of capital. And although it kind of sucks sometimes to have to unhook from a piece of equipment and hook up to another one, it's 10 minutes and then you're moving again. So it's really not that much of an inconvenience to just unhook implements and hook back up to something else. And so we pretty quickly realized we got to sell some stuff here. And so we sold 3 tractors and we sold a baler. Since that, we also had a tractor burn up in a fire. So we're down to 3 tractors and still operating, believe it or not. But that sale of that equipment freed up $134,000. And this was several years ago. It'd probably be worth more now. But the idea of opportunity cost is an important one. And I've had people in presentations talk and say, opportunity cost is good and all that, but it's not a real number. It's kind of imaginary, something along those lines. And, makes yourself feel good to charge an opportunity cost, but it doesn't really matter. And I just throw those numbers into a compound interest calculator and say you sold that equipment, put $134,000 into the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index and earned 10% over the next 30 years. And that would turn into over $2.3 million. So if other people out there have capital sitting idle and they don't care about opportunity cost, I would welcome you to lend it to me at 0%. I'm happy to take that off your hand. But I would encourage you to look at it as a real cost. And in reality, what my dad did with that capital when he sold that equipment was bought a rental property that has appreciated in value and cash flowed every single year since. And it's just, I don't know, it's powerful. So, it's an important one to look at. The next one that we really dove into our farm, and to give a little more context, is hay production. Again, we raise a lot of organic row crops, which means we don't have the chemical tools for weed and pest management that our conventional counterparts do. And so we used rotating pasture and hay into the row crop rotation as a very useful tool for us in managing weed pressure and pest pressure. So we had a lot of hay. That hay, when we finally sat down and really calculated our cost using fair market values for all that stuff that we discussed, our cost of production was around $150 a ton. And at the time, we could buy cow quality hay for winter, non-lactating, low input beef cows. We could buy it for well under $100 a ton, or conservatively $100 a ton. And to make matters even worse, not only was our cost $150 a ton, but the market value of that hay was organic dairy quality hay that we could have sold for probably $250 a ton. And we were feeding it to these beef cows that just didn't need it. And that $450 or $250 a ton works out to over $4.50 a day in cost. When you charge fair market value, again, that wasn't our cash cost into them, but we realized how inefficient it was to feed that kind of hay to our beef cows. And so we had a decision to make at that point. Could go a couple of different directions. We could either choose to sell that hay, continue making hay and sell it at market value and buy back cow quality hay, or we just stop making it altogether. And neither my dad and I are very mechanical. We don't enjoy sitting in a tractor. We prefer grazing. And so we've chose the route of making less hay. And in transparency, we still do make some hay, but we use it more as a management tool for the spring flush and excess grass, as opposed to as a full season enterprise for acres. So in Minnesota here, I noticed a lot of people from out west where moisture and things are probably a little different. We can get 3 or 4 grazings or cuttings per year on our land. And the majority of that comes in the spring, May and June. 60% of that growth probably comes in a 2-month period. And so we have a lot of grass in the early season and not as much in the late season. So we use it sometimes to manage that first cutting excess grass and move that into grazing on the next rotations. But we've dropped it as a full season enterprise. But anyway, towards that goal of making less hay, again, this was a cool thing that you realize when you take hay ground that was being used to feed your cows and you stop doing that, you have all this grass, you can expand your cow herd and do that through sort of kind of when you start buying hay instead of producing it, it's sort of like you're expanding your ranch through somebody else's hay ground, and you're able to, just that is kind of how I viewed it anyway. And we've been able to expand our cow herd by about double, and we'll continue to grow it without expanding our acres much over that time, just by taking hay ground and also through some other things that we'll discuss. But that was another one. And then also we manage that excess growth and forage sometimes by bringing in seasonal livestock herds. In our case, we're bringing in dairy heifers. We're in dairy country here. And so we work with a large scale dairy farm who brings us dairy heifers in the spring, and we send them back kind of whenever we want. So if this year was very dry, we sent them home early. On wet years, we may keep them around here yet for another month or two. And that's been a really cool tool to use to adapt our stock, or to flex our stocking rate to adapt to the weather and the season, and to move towards that goal of reducing hay production. But again, when we reduced our hay production, we had to replace that somehow, because at the time, and what most people in this area do, is feed hay as soon as the pastures stop growing, which is sometime middle of October to early November. And then they're feeding first in November or middle of October all the way through the beginning of May. That's what we were doing. And so we wanted to change that. And so we did that through a couple things. One is grazing cover crops. We use, and I'll talk about them a little bit more here as we go, so I won't dive into it too much. Another big one is actually cover crop residue. It's funny, in this area, a lot of people call corn stalk residue trash. And it's just a kind of ironic term that they call it trash or wasted. It's a wasted resource because it's an incredible feed for a low input non-lactating beef cow, which is what we've got at that time of year. And so we've actually gone now to grazing on corn stalks until the second half of January most years, with the exception of the occasional early snow. It's not so much snow depth that stops us from grazing it. It's thaws and refreezes and crusting over the snow that cows start to struggle with. I figure if we can drive a truck over a snowdrift, we shouldn't expect a cow to dig through it to eat corn stalks. So that's kind of, I guess, a sign of when it's too tough on them. And I think of the last 10 years or so, 2 years have not been the second week of January. And those have been middle of December, but otherwise we're pretty consistently second week or second half of January. And that alone knocks off 2 months of grazing that the neighbors that we used to do and that most people in this area do. And it's not free, but it's way cheaper than any other kind of feed source we could get, and it's here in abundance. The challenge in our area is finding somebody who's willing to not till it black in the fall. We're in a heavy tillage area, and so we've partnered with actually a couple. One is a tillage farmer, and he wants us to get the cattle off right before the first big solid freeze. So we go to him first, and then the other is a no-till farmer, and he would prefer we didn't bring cattle until the ground freezes. So we kind of move from one to the other because he doesn't want to worry about compaction issues and stuff on the no-till ground. So that kind of chain of corn stalks has allowed us to, manage that pretty well. Over the years, we've experimented with a bunch of different things. We've actually sent our cows all the way down to Nebraska to graze corn stalks. That was pretty slick. We did it for 3 years before the guy we partnered with decided, for whatever reason, he didn't want our cows back, and we didn't pursue anybody else. But they say that maybe 1 out of 10 or 15 years will snow down there be an issue, and then not be able to graze corn stalks down there. Well, in the 3 years we did it, we hit one of those years, and I think it was the first year we sent them down there. So we had all the trucking costs, plus the custom grazing fees, plus we had to pay for hay. And so it turned out to be a pretty expensive year. But we gave it another 2 years, and those years went quite well. We were able to get our feed costs to about $1.80 per day, and that was hands off. That photo they left on the truck in like late October, early November, and we didn't see them until the beginning to middle of March. That was really slick. That was enjoyable, and we probably should look into it again. But since then, we've kind of partnered with more people up here and just continued to do that. And the question for us is, if we're 75 cents a day here, and we're $1.80 down there all for a whole winter, but we're 75 cents a day here until the middle of January, we could afford to maybe be $3 a day from January to March 15th and still average to the same cost as sending them all down to Nebraska, if that makes sense. So that's part of why we've kept them up here, is we figure on average our cost, even if our feed costs after getting off corn stalks is quite a bit more expensive, balancing it out with the others is better, or is advantageous. Plus we have registered seed stocks, so we like keeping an eye on them. And when we buy in hay, one of the very awesome perks of that is importing fertility, and so that's been a huge value to us, that we've bale grazed on a lot of ground and built fertility like crazy with that. And I do see a question here on the cornfields fenced for cows.
Yeah, go ahead and address that. Yeah. And then I've got another question for you.
Sure. Sorry. And if I'm rambling, you just feel free to shut me up. So.
Nope, you're good so far. This is awesome.
Cool. Yeah. So we've got a combination of some that are fenced and some that are not. And we kind of price it accordingly, sort of. We've paid between 50 and 90 cents a day, depending on how much infrastructure, fence, water, and labor is provided. 90 cents being the higher end, obviously, when all of that is provided, and 50 cents when there's no water, no fence, and no labor. And we've got not a great setup, but a somewhat efficient setup with a hydraulic roll-up high tensile wire. And my dad will drive the tractor with a loader bucket full of fence posts, and I'll stand out and push them in the ground with the bucket. And we can build a fence around a 50, like a 50 or an 80 or 100-acre cornfield in a couple hours with the two of us. And it seems like a real pain in the butt when you're doing it, but when you look at the cost, it's a no-brainer. And so there are some fields we got to put in fence every fall and roll it up every spring. It's worth it. That no-till farmer really believes in livestock integration and has been trying things with cover crops in a rotation in his cropping. And so he has fenced several of his farms now for us so that we don't have to do that there. And that's made our life a lot more pleasant as well. But before he did that, we were building fence and would continue to build fence because of the value proposition that is there. The biggest hassle is water. And so far, we've been able to get water either by running pipe and leaving it kind of on a constant flow system to keep it from freezing, or some ground that's got creeks and streams, or tile line. There's a lot of tile that runs, and those have been a couple ways that we've gotten water. We've not yet toyed or played with having to haul water, and I hope we never do. That sounds like a pain in the butt, and I'm not sure. I haven't done it, so I'm not sure I would say that I would or not based on if you have to haul water, because I haven't had to do it. But especially in our winters, dealing with freezing and stuff, that just doesn't sound enjoyable. So, Jared, you had sorry.
You might just as well haul blocks of ice out to them as haul water in Minnesota in the winter. But you'll probably dive into the cow production side. Just the question that I had was more around that, like when are you calving? And if you're going to address that later, we'll wait till then.
I don't know that I do, and so that's a good question. Yeah, so I guess our cow production system is we raise kind of moderate frame, low input cattle. We're raising bulls for Faro Cattle Company, if that tells you anything about the type of cow we're trying to raise. We calve starting in the second, like April 20th, roughly. We used to calve in the middle of March. And by calving later in the spring, obviously, that allows us to feed them pretty poor quality feed and kind of be pretty tough on them in winter. It's I don't know how people view on it, but I guess I was raised and told sort of the idea of that the cow's protein supplement, or the cow's supplement is the fat on their back. And in this area, a lot of people, it's pretty interesting actually to see a lot of cows in this area. They are fed TMR all winter. They're big, tall, framey cows fed TMR all winter. They come out of winter fat, and then they lose condition on summer grass and pasture, which blows my mind. We're kind of the opposite, where our cows get fat all summer on grass, and then they don't, they're not twigs and sticks and bones by the end of spring, but they will potentially lose a little bit of condition. But by calving late enough, that's not been an issue, and they start putting on condition as soon as grass starts growing. They just put on the pounds, and they're in great condition for breeding season, and haven't had any issues with it yet. So that's kind of been the model with that.
Yeah, great. I appreciate you addressing that.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit I mean, I see they're red cows. I'm all for red cows.
Yeah.
Are they a composite? Are they more of a pure red Angus? What are you
Yeah.
looking at genotypically?
Yeah. So I mentioned my grandpa used to have the old white face, fleck face Simmentals, and I've still got some pictures of those things when they were here, like big old ones. Somewhere along the line, probably after that New Zealander, he switched to red Angus, and their purebred red Angus primarily. Actually, last year we just added a small herd of black Angus, registered black Angus cows of the same kind of breeding. But his philosophy was everybody and their brother is raising black Angus cattle, so it's probably not a bad thing to be different, was sort of his philosophy around that. And so he bought a red Angus herd, kind of, and they went the grass finishing, or the grass-based low input genetics route at that time. And they were selling bulls off the farm on their own, and they went and my dad went to a Faro Cattle Company bull sale to purchase some bulls of his own, and got connected with Kit Faro at that time, who was in an expansion mode of Faro Cattle Company. And we've been raising bulls for them ever since, for the last about 15 or 20 years now. Been raising bulls for them. Primarily, like I say, red Angus, and just this last year we've added black Angus out of Kit Faro's herd in Northeast Colorado. He was in a drought, and so we bought some cows from him, and they're all purebred, but been really happy with them. It's been, I've helped some friends calving season and talked to them, and they talk about living in the calving barn, checking every 45 minutes or watching the screens, and they talk about calving troubles and just all the work that goes into it. And I'm sure grateful to be in the production system that we are. I sometimes feel a bit like a fraud when I come and talk about things like this, because a lot of these decisions were made, and I'm blessed to have been made by my dad and grandpa long before me. And I grew up with a lot of these decisions. And so it's been second nature to me, and I've never experienced anything different other than a short venture into Herefords, which had a whole bunch of calving issues that I don't care to do again. But it's been really a really good experience down that production model that I'm grateful that our family's been doing for as long as we have.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for diverging into that. I think that's critical to kind of understand how that low input model, you have to have the cows that fit that, right? Otherwise, you're going to have a huge fallout, and there's going to be some cost in that. So
I agree completely. I've talked to some neighbors who see what we're doing with cows on corn stalks, and they say, I think I should probably do that. that looks like a brilliant idea. And I'm just, like, whoa, hold your horses. You've got 1,700-pound cows that calve in January and February. Like, that's a totally different scenario. And vice versa. If someone who has a super high input system like that, and says, "Man, I really like your cows. I think I should raise your cows in my system." I would probably hesitate and tell them not to do that as well, because if you put our cows in a system getting corn silage all winter, they're going to have their own problems like obesity, and stuff. And they're going to be inefficiently using all that energy and feed. Our cows aren't meant for maximum weaning weights and maximum milk. They're meant for really thriving in the environment that our ranch provides. And when a person is going to artificially change their environment through buildings, bunks, and feed wagons, the same cow that thrives in that environment is not the same cow that thrived before those things were in existence on their ranch. And so, yeah, it goes both ways. You shouldn't try and force the wrong cow into our system, and you shouldn't try to force our cow into the wrong system. They gotta line up. So yeah,
spot on.
Good, cool. Well, again, if people have questions, feel free to jump into the chat. I'll keep on moving through these here. I think I'm probably pushing up on the 30 minutes you told me to talk on, so I'll skim through these as a couple.
Yeah, you're actually doing just fine, Jared. Yep, we were a little bit late getting started, so you're good.
Okay, sure. So this was a kind of a system that we're really trying to figure out, how do we utilize our highly productive cropland here. This ground grows 220 plus bushel corn. It's $250 an acre kind of land rent stuff, and so is perennial pasture the most efficient way to do that? And I'm not sure if it is yet, but some things that we tried is using annual cover crops to more efficiently use it. And so one thing that we've tried is kind of using a cool season cover crop in the spring. And that could have either been a fall seeded rye or a spring seeded oats mix. And then either grazing or making hay on that in the spring. Typically, we're making some hay because, as I mentioned, we have so much forage in the spring anyway. We don't need it. And then after that, using a sorghum sedan grass mix as well. And when we did that, we were able to harvest about 4 bales off the cool season, plus 170 grazing days, cow-calf grazing days in the fall off the sorghum. And so this isn't really probably using the best math, but I'm not the best at figuring out how to allocate costs when you've got some hay and some grazed. But anyway, I just totaled up the total grazing days, divided it by our cost, and it was $1.92 per cow-calf day, or per cow day in feed costs. That's not using the hay at market value. I don't know what market value, but that's our cost in it. So one method that we've tried. We really like the sorghum sedan grass in our area. Cool season grasses is the dominant species, and it's a species that is kind of designed to grow and graze 3 or 4 times a year. And if you don't graze it, it gets rank, loses quality, shades out new growth, and kind of you're limiting your total forage production by doing that here. And so we try to keep on top of that, where sorghum sedan grass is a warm season grass, and it just keeps on growing all season. So if we don't need it, we just let it keep growing, and it still maintains high quality, feed value until it freezes. And even after a frost, it's still good for a non-lactating beef cow. You can see there the 2 different kind of systems. We're using it when it's green. It's great feed for a lactating cow, and it's no problem for a non-lactating cow after a frost, where cool season grasses just lose quality. So we really like using those warm season cover crops. It's a really good drought. I think I was telling Jared before the call here that we're for what we would in our region be a bit of a drought right now. We're pretty dry, and our pastures are just not growing right now. We've grazed most of them 2 or some 3 times, and in the last couple of weeks, it's just pretty much stopped. And when you plan on 3 or 4 grazings off everything, and you don't get that 3rd or 4th grazing, it hurts. And so that sorghum sedan grass is a really good way for us to balance. When we're dry, we can dive into the corn stalks in the summer, and if not, we'll just stockpile it for late season grazing. And that's what we've continued to do with that. Another thing we tried is, again, we have an abundance of corn stalks around us. And so we thought, if we can't get to it in the second half of January, maybe we should be bringing corn stalks to our cows. We're usually pulling them off. It doesn't have anything to do with cow body condition. They're doing fine on it. We're just not able to get to it through the snow. And so a couple of years now, we've baled corn stalks and brought them to our farm and grazed them on our land. And that year, you can see on the bottom left there, that was a really weird winter where we took them off the corn stalks they were grazing, not because of snow, but because it was too warm at the end of January and it was muddy and it was messing up this no-tiller's farm. He didn't want it to be a muddy mess. So in January in Minnesota, it's very, very unusual that we have to bring them home because of warmth, but we did. And we grazed 200, we grazed another 30 days on just straight corn stalk bales. We gave them 8 bales a day, no protein supplement, nothing, and they did great. That was an exceptionally warm year, and I think that probably helped their body condition and stuff. We did it the next year as well, and they didn't do quite as good. It was quite a bit colder, a lot more snow, so we rolled out some alfalfa bales with it just for a little bit of protein, but either way, it works out pretty good. It's an amazing way to import fertilizer. You can see the photo on the right there. There's a ton of residue left over. They consume probably about 50% of the corn stalk. When you're grazing, they're eating the leaves and husks. When you bale, you rake up everything. They won't eat the actual stalk. So that all gets left on the ground. But we do that on hillsides and steep ground, and we can build fertility really, really fast with it. But it is a bit of a management challenge in future years. So yeah, another thing that we've experienced or experimented with. And then kind of just to this whole conversation of paradigm shifters and things that we've really tried to do is figure out how we can add value and minimize depreciation in our herd. And so we realized pretty quickly that our weaned heifer calves are undervalued relative to a bred heifer in our operation, especially with our genetics and stuff. We've been able to market bred females at a pretty good price. And so we retain virtually all of our heifers, give them a chance to get bred, and so we always have females to sell. That's been beneficial in several ways. One is obviously you're adding value to that, and two is you have more animals, so you can cull harder and really improve your herd. I think there's a lot of value that you can do. I see a question I'll answer here in a little bit, but there's a lot of value you can add in improving your genetics with bulls, and you should improve your genetics with bulls. But one of the greatest and most efficient ways to improve your genetics is there's always a bottom 10 or 20% of your herd that you can cull. And when we retain all those heifers, we have the ability to cull more on the bottom end, whether that's for udders, foot quality, paternal issues, or another thing we really like to do is cull anything that's due after 45 days. We keep the bulls out for 60, and our vet is pretty good at preg checking to the date. And so we'll cull anything that's due after 45 days, which has compounding and cascading events. There's a lot of compounding and cascading effects, and one of which is when you start to tighten up that window, those calves come earlier, they're heavier, so you got heavier calves. And also you got cows with more time to come back and start cycling before you're rebreeding, so you get a better breed up. So the tighter the window you can have, the better. And by having more females, I'd like to get to a point. We've been growing and continue to keep growing the herd, so we've not been able to cull as hard as we'd like. But when we get to whatever our max capacity is and we're not expanding, we'll have so many females coming in that we can cull. I wouldn't be surprised if someday we could have enough females that we can only select cows that are bred in the first 21 to 30 days. Maybe, it would be a dream to be able to only keep cows that were bred in the first cycle. That would be awesome. So ways that we can add value to the cows, and also, again, you're adding values to the calves by that because they're putting on more weight by fall. I like the quote. I don't remember where I read it now, but it's, what's the number one way to increase weaning weight in a calf? And it's not creep feed, it's not bull EPDs, it's age at date of weaning. And those calves that are born earlier in your calving cycle will be way more and be worth more in the fall than the ones born on day 75 or 90. Or if you're a person calving year round, that's just incredibly inefficient use of grass and stuff as well. And also, when you're doing that, you've got a 90 plus day calving window. You've got cows that are being fed a ration that they could be on a non-lactating cow ration in the same group as a cow that's lactating with a 4-week-old calf, and you can't feed them. You're feeding them together, so you're feeding one cow more than it needs, a more expensive ration, and another cow potentially less. So, a lot of efficiencies there that we've really liked by keeping heifers and focusing on tightening up that calving window. And then the other thing that we just tried to minimize is never sell cull cows at the sale barn. There's always a few cows that we're not. When we cull cows, most of the cows are still very good commercial cows and make a great cow in another program, but they're not. We're seed stock producers always trying to improve our genetics, and so we're culling the bottom end. I don't want to bring them to a sales barn and take that price. I don't want them to go there open. So anything in our herd that's under 5 years old, we've been breeding for fall calving that's in good condition and a good cow otherwise, because we believe they'll make a great commercial cow on somebody else's ranch. And that adds a tremendous amount of value versus their cull price. And being that we're, April, May calvers, by the time we finally get a preg check, it's pretty much time to turn out a bull for fall calving anyway. So it's really not a big extra expense at that point for us to turn a bull out with them and keep them a little longer and sell them as either bred fall calvers or fall pairs the following year. So that's what we like to do. And then like young fat cows that come up open again, we may grass finish those as well. We're trying to do everything we can to eliminate selling cows at the sale barn for market price and just minimize that depreciation on a cow, because there's two major points of depreciation in a cow's life. One is going from bred to open, and another one is going from alive to dead. And so we don't really want to take one either of those, but we're trying to figure out wherever we can add value to them in those decisions. So, I think that's all I have. Happy to take questions, or I can answer the question in the chat there as well.
Yeah, go ahead and jump back and answer that one. So I'll just read it here for the listeners. Are you seeing a lot of weeds that come in after bale grazing? How long before you see the grass come back well enough to graze again?
Yeah. So that was my biggest concern, and I remember posting a TikTok video about while we were doing this, and there were, I don't remember, 100 comments, and probably half the people were like, "This is awesome! I can't wait to see what happens." And half the people were saying, "You are the biggest idiot in the world. Why on earth would you do that? You're going to have a thistle patch everywhere." And that was my fear, is we were going to have a weed thistle patch mess on some of this ground. And I was pleasantly surprised that thistles did not come too bad. We did see where the heavy, dense, corn stalks were right in the ring, where all that waste is, that in our environment with a lot of moisture, it breaks down probably faster than in some regions out west. So keep in mind whatever your region would be. But year one, you didn't get much growth where that was. But by the end of year one and into year two, you're starting to see that break down and growing grass. But even with that ground that didn't grow grass, we fed this on some of our poorest ground. And I don't have I didn't go out and do clip tests and forage, dry matter testing. But visually, I wouldn't be surprised if we pretty close to made up for the ground that was that was not growing because of that mat. We probably came pretty close to making up for it with the extra growth around it and all of the manure and nutrient that was deposited there. So I don't know that we really gave up much growth. And then in year 2, 3, and 4 and after, we saw growth skyrocket because all that stuff that had broken down really started to turn into productive grass. We did this in 3 different places. In one place, we tilled and we planted the sorghum Sudan grass. And the only thing I'll say about that is, man, those piles of corn stalks retained moisture. And it was on a hill, and the only way I could till a disc through it is to go downhill. So I'd have to go downhill, pick it up, go to the top of the hill, and go back down the hill because I couldn't pull. It was just spinning. It was just a mucky, wet mess that you couldn't disc through. And it took a couple passes for that to really disc that up. And I don't know if that was a bad thing or not. He grew some amazing sorghum Sudan grass. There was a lot of fertility there, and we've got a corn crop in there now that I'm excited to see how it produces for corn this fall. I'm guessing it'll be pretty good.
Thomas is asking about custom grazing rates. Thanks for answering that question, Jared.
Yeah.
How do you come up with custom grazing rates, and how difficult is it to find producers willing to pay what you're asking?
Yeah. So it's a good question. The rate we needed it to make sense on tillable ground. We wanted it to. We have some pasture that's cheaper, and we could have put them on the pasture ground and made it work at a lower rate. But most of our land is tillable ground. We've seeded down to pasture, and we didn't want to get into an enterprise that wasn't going to work on that ground as well. So we start with what are our costs and make sure that it's at least going to cover that. The biggest challenge for us was not having done dairy heifers before and stuff. We didn't really know how many cow days per acre, or heifer days per acre we'd be able to get and stuff. But we did our best to guesstimate that. And so we ultimately settled on a price of $2.20 per $2 per animal unit as our base minimum, is what we needed. And then it worked out when we talked to them that we settled on a price slightly higher than that, but we knew that was our minimum price that we needed to make sense. And that was based on roughly assuming that we would get one animal unit per acre for 165 days, or May 15th to November 1st. And at $2, that's $330 per acre. And at a $220 or $250 an acre land rent, that's an $80 profit per acre that we were content with. We felt that competed with conventional row crops. It's not great, but custom grazing we saw as more of a tool to fill excess grass or to scale quickly if we took on more grass, but it's not a very large profit center, and we couldn't charge super high dollars. As far as getting a producer willing to pay, I think that would have been tough to get the price we needed with a cow-calf producer. At a per animal unit basis, we would have to be over $3 per animal unit. And at least in my areas, I don't know that many people would have been willing to pay for that. So the first people we started reaching out to were dairy farms who were used to paying custom feed rates for heifers and feedlots. They understand I'd say at least in this area, they have a pretty good handle on their numbers. We've got kind of a mid to large size 500 to 2,000 cow dairy region where they're really running it as a business. They know their numbers, and so that helped, because when you come to them with a price that's lower than their feedlot price, that's an obvious benefit to them. We called, I think, 2 dairies, and the second one said yes, so we didn't have to do that much digging. and if you're a person that doesn't have that quick of luck, then I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
We lucked out with that, but I think going to somebody who understands their numbers and offering them a value that you can prove with numbers makes it easier.
Yeah, that's good. What, as you guys have made those changes, sounds like over the generations, what would you tell other people that are really skeptical about switching to more of a regenerative focused farming or ranching system? You talked about paradigms, and I contend that, one of the biggest compaction layers is between our 2 ears. And
Yeah.
that is the toughest thing to be able to believe that we can actually make some changes. First, what worked for you, and then what do you feel is, maybe it ties together, what do you feel is holding people back from doing a system that I would say is now proven?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this may be a personal view, but I feel like when the regenerative ag and sustainable ag movement kind of came, they did a bad job of bringing everyone along with. And they kind of almost did this thing where this is soil health, this is great, and if you're not doing it, you're the problem. And that immediately turned a lot of people into a defensive mindset that was unnecessary, and there was no reason for it. Because they're saying, whoa, we're doing the best we can. And they had to start defending their practices. And when you start locking that up, like you're saying, that between the 2 years, your mindset, it's really hard to be open to new ideas. And so whenever I talk to people about this kind of stuff, I never want to address it from a perspective of you're doing something wrong and you need to get on board, get with the program or figure it out. And I know people who have addressed it that way, and I think that was a mistake. Another part of I don't want to call it a problem, but I think I've heard it from a lot of people is, yeah, we'd love to be more sustainable, regenerative, but I can't do it at the expense of my bottom line, and I need to make money doing it. And that's fair. But I really think that the most effective path forward probably be to make the financial argument first before the regeneration of soil, the farm, land, and soil. I think there's a very real financial argument that people will get on board with. And my brain works in spreadsheets pretty much. I'm a spreadsheet nerd. And so I like running numbers and examples and stuff. But when you start showing what some of this stuff does for the bottom line, it's really hard to argue that. People can argue soil health and all day long, and that won't work here. But I don't know if you've got some real hard numbers proven out in the system similar to who you're talking to, it's pretty hard to argue that, I guess.
And I'm more familiar with the livestock industry than the row crop farming, but from a few colleagues that I do have, it's been a tough few years for them, where there's not any margin, a lot of losses, a lot of equity's been burned up to keep farms in the family and keep farms alive. And you, in essence, have said, okay, we can farm this and raise an organic crop at a profit, or we can graze and still have a profit. To me, that is pretty paradigm shifting. I didn't know, I didn't know if cattle could ever compete with row crop rent and the fair market value of rent. So that's pretty awesome.
I will give some context to that. Organic row crops, from a profit per acre, blow grazing out of the water. It's far more profitable, but and this is where the land soil context come into play. We're doing, I don't know how many tillage passes a year. We're in erosive ground. I don't like what it's doing to our land and our soil. I don't enjoy the lifestyle of an organic row crop farmer. All summer, we're spending in a tractor, slowly cultivating, harrowing, flaming. It's a very labor intensive. There's profit aside, there's nothing about the enterprise I enjoy. So that part comes into more of a lifestyle discussion as well, which is another really big piece of this. But from a conventional commodity row crop business, I think grazing can be competitive. Especially right now. I mean, the markets are fantastic. But like I said, from a custom grazing perspective, even I think that we were competitive with conventional row crops, which is what most people around here do anyway. Same thing goes for them. They don't want to be an organic row crop farmer either, because it's a lot of work and a lot of stress, and it's not the best. So I kind of put that out over here on this other pedestal of like, yes, it's very profitable, but you have to be willing to make some sacrifices. But if you're kind of competing in a commodity deal anyway, I think grazing can be competitive. And I'll also, caveat this too with, in full disclosure, our cow-calf business, we're raising seed stock, and so we have a bit of a premium as well, which that is going to make us a little more competitive than the commercial cow-calf producer. But especially in this region with winters, what they are. But right now, for sure, I don't know that there's a place on the planet you can't make money with cow-calf producers, but for sure here you can still be competitive and beat out row crop farmers for sure.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody who's just wanting to start out? No land, no money, no livestock. Big desire, want to get going.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's possible. I'd say that for sure. I think I've done. I at one of my slide presentations, I have a page of a bunch of the podcast guests I've had on that would be first generation farmers, and it's a lot. I don't remember how many. Dozens of people are still doing it today, building first generation farms and ranches. So it's definitely possible. So don't let anyone tell you it's not. Then it's hard because I don't want to tell somebody if the perfect farm comes up for sale not to buy it if they can, but land is probably not the best place to start. Start buying cash flowing assets, being livestock, probably as quick as possible, and seek out leased land. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think I've heard from a lot of people, there's just no land available. I probably said it at one point in time, and it's maybe true if you're looking within 5 miles of your backyard. But if you look and you're willing to move, there's opportunity all over the place. I've had people reach out to me with opportunities in other states, and I'm kind of tied here to a family operation, so I'm not willing to move. But for people who are, if you love this and you want this business, be willing to move potentially, and that'll open some doors. Early invest in cash flow producing assets, not depreciating assets. Run on leased land if you can, and just grow at the scale you can. There's people who do it without any off-farm income. I go back and forth on that because on one hand, I think having focus on one thing and building something with full focus on that business is going to allow you to do better than you can if you're spread multiple directions with your mental capacity. But I don't think it hurts to have some off-farm income while trying to grow a business that's very capital intensive, unless you are able to scale your land base very quickly and custom graze. There's people do that too, and you can do that quite rapidly without needing off-farm income too.
So, yeah, very good. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
What's the vision look like for you and your operation?
Yeah. So I kind of talked. We've been really going back and forth on should we even be row crop farming at all anymore. We have one farm that the owners don't want it running livestock production, and they don't want conventional crops, and so we continue to raise organic row crops on that. And so that's the only farm we're really doing that on. And I really like Dallas Mount has talked a lot about the difference between diversification and distraction. And as we've expanded our cow herd and expanded our grazing acres and reduced our organic crop acres on our other land, we've gotten to the point where this one farm is the only thing we're still running organic row crops on. And has that become a distraction rather than a valid diversification? That's a question we're asking ourselves. And also, when you have a given set of overheads, that being a combine, tractors, planters, and all that it made sense at 300 to 500 acres of row crops, does it still make sense at 120 acres of row crops to carry that same overhead? Because the overhead hasn't gone down, just the acres that you run through them has gone down. So we're contemplating and discussing whether we drop that altogether and just focus purely on grazing or not. And that's one discussion that we're having pretty seriously, and I think it could be something that we do. I mentioned to you, I think before the call, that this year we're losing about 20% of our grazing acres, and the numbers I shared with everyone here today is excluding that. So I didn't, we're not losing 20% more, but I'm not sure if we're quite comfortable giving that up now. At the same time, we're losing a pretty large portion of our grazing acres, but that's a big thing we're contemplating, is how do we just get into 100% grazing, so that because I've felt that distraction. I think that's a real thing when you should be taking care of something on the livestock side, and you got to be planting corn, or you should be out cultivating because there's weeds growing in the corn, but you got some calving happening or something like that. And I think it'd be a pretty powerful thing to be able to focus solely on the grazing enterprise, and wouldn't be surprised if that focus resulted in more income as well. Hard to quantify before the fact.
And being a numbers guy and driven by margin, how do you factor in quality of life into a decision such as dropping or adding an enterprise?
Yeah, that's been, if for folks who have listened to my podcast, at the end of the podcast, I ask 4 questions to everyone. And the last question I've asked that's really been a lot on my mind is, what's the idea of enough? Is there a point where you stop grinding, stop working so hard, and just enjoy what you have? And I think that's kind of to what you're talking about of the lifestyle pieces. do we have enough that we don't need to grind and do this work that's not enjoyable anymore just for a few more dollars? And I'd say we're getting close to that point. Uh, it's You see so many people work forever, their whole lives, to make a few more dollars, and for what? Is there a point where you hit enough that you can start to change your focus from growth and income generation to lifestyle? Not that I'm going to spend the rest of my life golfing, but I
Yeah.
think it's time to start focusing a little more on lifestyle, because the last 10 years have definitely been a grind. And I don't think that was the worst thing for the stage of life that we're in. I really
Mhm.
always like the quote that says, work for 5 years like no one wants to, and live the rest of your life like no one else can. I think there's some value to an early in your life grind period to get ahead. But we've got 3 young kids now that are growing, and I don't want to miss that either.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Yeah, that's really good. Um, and thinking about, what you've presented here and being able to convey to those listeners the success that you have achieved. You've also interviewed, I don't know, how many podcasts have you done between the two podcasts that you've hosted?
uh, 290 something. And the Herd Quitter podcast essentially just rebranded. It's the same podcast now, but 290 something episodes, I think.
Okay, so are you hosting both of those then?
The Herd Quitter podcast, it's been the same podcast, but long story short, when Kit Farrow trademarked Herd Quitter, I just rebranded to Ranching Returns. So it's the
Okay,
same podcast, just a new name. But
gotcha.
yeah, I think 291 episodes since the start of the podcast in 2021.
Yeah, so you've interviewed um, hundreds of people. What are some commonalities between those, your own experience and those that you've interviewed that have led to their success?
Yeah. A Kind of back to what my dad and my grandpa had when that New Zealander called him out, is an ability to have an open mind and take, look at new ideas and give them a fair shake before just saying that won't work here. I think that's important. I think a true perspective of viewing a farmer ranch as a business, and demanding a return on equity and things like that, I think has been a commonality through most people, is viewing their business, their operations as true business, um, for sure. Um, I mean, I don't know if it has any. Maybe this is just everybody in agriculture, but I'm always amazed at how willing these people are to share.
Yeah,
Everybody is, and so there's probably something to them having talked to other people who are willing to share and sought out information, but they're willing to share with others too. That's definitely a common trait amongst them. Uh, yeah, it's a good
yeah,
question.
I would agree on all those points. And yeah, especially the last one, just how in our industry, that they're not worried about anything proprietary. They're not worried about competition and
Right.
just we want to help others. And I,
Right.
I really believe that's, the law of abundance that as we
Yes.
share, it comes back to us and we together will grow more than if we hoard and try to just take care of ourselves. So
Right.
what an amazing industry to be a part of.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I agree completely. That abundance mindset is a big one. I feel like, yeah, I didn't know what that meant for a long time, but I
Right.
got eventually. Yeah, you start seeing some people who think like, yeah, this there's only enough, and if I get a little more, if somebody else has something that's a little less than I have, and that's a sad perspective to have on life. I feel like, but I'm curious, because that enough question is, maybe I can't turn the tables here. I'll have to have you back on, since when I had you on a couple of years ago, I wasn't asking these questions. But what's your thought
Yeah.
on the lifestyle question, and when is enough, or what changes, and how do you balance lifestyle and investment?
It's something that I honestly struggle with myself, but as think I'm a little older than you are. I'm going to be 52 this year, so
Yeah.
um, I think as you grow older, you tend to value different things, and status and a strong balance sheet are not as important to me as they once were because I'm not necessarily proving myself to anybody else. That said, I do believe, we are talking about profitable stewardship, and I believe that we will be giving an accounting to our maker someday for what we've done and what we haven't done. So I'm not saying don't be profitable. What I
Right.
am saying is that not all things are measured on a balance sheet. And that's one of the things that we work with our clients is, it's great if you're profitable, but man, if your wife's going to divorce you, there's something wrong, and we better address this, or you
Yeah.
won't be profitable.
Yeah.
Or if your health is tanking, or if you're burning up soil organic matter. Some of these things that I believe are a measure of wealth that your banker's not going to ask you about. I'm going to ask those questions because I know that from personal experience, if those things aren't in balance, at some point it's going to be reflected in your cash flow and it's going to affect your quality of life.
Yeah. I like that. Yep. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So I think it's something worth pondering, and something worth asking for all of us, um, whether we're in a W-2 employee job or whether we're entrepreneurs and business owners or multi-generational, we need to ask what is the quality of life that we want to have? And I like your question, when is enough enough? So speaking of your podcast, tell us how people can find it. I mean, probably most of the listeners here are already subscribed, but in
Yeah.
case nobody is or somebody
Yeah.
isn't, let's tell them where they can find it and kind of what to expect from listening to the Ranching Returns podcast.
Right. Yeah, you bet. It's the Ranching Returns podcast, and you should be able to find it on pretty much any podcast platform you listen. If you don't find it, let me know, and I should get it added to that platform, or on YouTube. But as far as what to expect, if you're sick of listening to me after this and you don't want to hear me again, rest assured, most of the people talking on the podcast are my guests, not myself. I spent
Yeah.
most of the time asking questions, and I think that's uh, I've really enjoyed that. The way I see it is I'm just trying to learn from each of these people and asking the questions that I would want to ask them, and so hopefully they're the same questions that you would want to ask them as well. Um, Talk to pretty much grazing-based livestock producers all across the country and some across the world as well. So if you want to listen to grazing-based livestock producers, check it out. I'd sure appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Jump over there, like, subscribe, do all those things so that the algorithm knows, hey, this is important to me. And
That's right. And listen to, I think it's episode 172, I think, that Jared Sorensen here was the guest. So
that's been a bit. Yeah,
it has
that's
been good. Yeah. Yeah. 172. Yeah.
yeah. So you've almost doubled in episodes since then.
I'm getting close. Yeah. I'll have to have you back on for the double. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty steady growth. That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. How, just curious, what's your cadence for releasing new episodes?
Yeah. Every single Monday morning at 1 a.m. And I'm amazed how many people maybe it's a time change thing, but I wake up at 6, 7 o'clock and there's like 800 people that have already listened. And I'm like, my goodness, these are early risers. And I'm usually
Right.
yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, every single Monday morning, when I started, everyone told me you got to be consistent, and I'm proud to say in 290 something episodes, never missed a Monday. So
Good for you. Good for
yeah,
you. Yep. Our listeners kind of never really know when it's going to come out by the time we get it edited and so forth. So,
yeah,
so yeah, for those that are live here, you can expect this. Generally, it's going to come out early next week. Um, and then our cadence is a little sporadic. We do mostly webinars, but we do some one-off interviews as well, and then some solos. So it's kind of a sprinkled mix in there.
yeah,
But
yeah, for sure.
no,
Well,
it's been awesome to have you as a guest here. I really appreciate it. And as a producer of a podcast, I know it's a labor of love. It's like it takes a lot of effort to be able to do
yeah,
that, and admire you for being so consistent. That is really awesome.
sure.
Um,
Yeah.
Definitely
Well, and
encourage you to
you
keep it
make
up.
around the world are pretty incredible. So it's been an awesome opportunity.
Yeah. Well, very good, Jared. We appreciate you, appreciate the work that you do, and wish you and your family the best of success as you continue to grow. We appreciate those that have listened here and those those that are here live today and those that are listening to the replay either on YouTube or the podcast channels. And so at Ag Steward, what we do is we are focused on helping family farmers and ranchers to be highly profitable, regenerate the land that they steward, and create legacy businesses. That's the focus of everything that we do, and we strive to practice what we preach, albeit imperfectly. So I am the third generation here on our ranch in Nevada, and we're raising the fourth generation. And I can tell you these principles that Jared has shared today, they're absolutely true and applicable, and encourage you to go back and listen and take notes on what you've learned. Um, so challenge for each of you, because you've listened here to the end, what's the one thing that you will do because you've listened to this podcast? Write it down and then take action on it. Don't leave the scene of an epiphany without taking action. And so I know that for each of you, myself included, there's been something that's come to mind. Hey, let's look at this. Let's adjust this. Let's measure this. Whatever that is, whether it came from the words that we said or from a higher source that spoke directly to your spirit, don't discount it and absolutely take action on it. So, yeah, final thought, Jared, that you might have before we log off here.
Well, I appreciate sharing what you mentioned there at the end, and I've really tried to over the last few months and years here utilize the platform God gave me to share His to glorify Him. And so I'd encourage folks who haven't who maybe don't know and realize the salvation that comes through Jesus to reach out. I welcome phone calls if that's something you want to learn more about. Nothing more important than in this world than the decision you make to follow Him. So I appreciate that opportunity.
Amen. I wholeheartedly agree. Wholeheartedly agree. So, well, very good, everyone. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you on another one.